We're reconvening Joint Information Technology Jitoc. And we've got Tim from the auditor's office with us.
Thank you. And it's when Mike asked if I could delay my presentation, I said I am, as ever, here to serve. So, as flexible as possible. You know how this stuff works. I'm going to do a kind of a quick presentation because you've got so much on the afternoon's agenda. Yes. All right.
Do we have a copy of this?
I think Mike's putting it up now. So I'm going to talk primarily about the audit that we completed several months ago of ADS's Enterprise Project Management Office. I'll talk much more briefly about the memo that we recently sent, which I believe the committee received, about the 10-year telecommunications plan. We had sent one memo to the Commissioner of Public Service, one to the two standing committees in the House and Senate, also this joint committee, and then 3 very brief updates that are relevant to the work of this committee. So the ADS audit was primarily motivated because the office had not done any audit work of the Agency of Digital Services since its inception. When we do what's called a risk assessment, where our audit team starts evaluating whether it's worth the resources of our office to look at something. When they found that the Enterprise Project Management Office was overseeing about 64, I think, projects totaling over $200 million, we thought that might rise to the level of being worthy of some resources. Also, it seems after several years of operation, it's an opportune moment to say, okay, how are they doing? Are there things that they could be improving upon? Are there systems in place that best serve both the people of Vermont's needs, but also the legislature's needs? So I'm going to start with a few sort of images from the report and then cut right to the recommendations and have a little bit of an explainer on each of those. And just to highlight, the reason we requested to come in and speak to you guys and why we're grateful to do it is much of what we found, the important findings of our audit team are things to help you understand whether these large IT projects are coming in on budget, on schedule, what explains the reasons if they're not, and also to be able to effectively hold ADS more accountable based on transparent information. I should say at the beginning, the 2 auditors who worked on this, Linda Lambert, who's one of our 2 most senior auditors, I think she dates back to Senator Brock's time as the state auditor, and Andrew Keegan, another talented auditor, worked with the ADS staff, which was a very positive collaborative experience. The first image I'm showing, this speaks just to the question. We picked, out of that 64 projects, we picked 6 to specifically focus on as our sample. This shows 5. I'll explain in a second why we don't show the 6th. CCB stands for it's the Cannabis Control Board. DLL is Liquor and Lottery. DCF, it's the Child Care Division, and then 2 specific DIVA projects. The 6th one is the so-called business portal at the Secretary of State. This was a many years vision, and it's going to be many more years till that vision's a reality. Let's just put it that way. I'll speak a little bit about how that project has, I believe, to use a non-auditor term, gone slightly sideways. You'll see that the baseline project estimates and the actual updated estimates change quite significantly in some cases. The most extreme one being a 125% increase for the Cannabis Control Board. And then there were a couple that came in slightly under their original estimate. The reason I show this is because these projects and their schedules and their costs change often for very good reasons. The legislature adds new expectations of a particular project. New cybersecurity elements are added. So it's not to say that you look at this and say, oh, they're not doing a good job because the project budget has gotten blown up. It's to be able to say what happened, what explains those changes. And what we found is that much of what's reported to the legislature or has been reported to the legislature wouldn't communicate to you that these increases have even happened. So it puts you in an awkward position where you're seeing everything's good, everything's good. Well, it might be good now because things have been either given more dollars or they've revised their time schedule, but things can sometimes be months, even years behind before I think you'd catch on to that. The second image is of the proximity to the actual anticipated completion schedule and where it came in. We did it in weeks just for ease. You can see that a couple of these have extended way beyond what had initially been envisioned. And only in the instance of DIVA's, I don't want to get the acronym wrong, but it's blind aging, et cetera. It's a self-service sort of online tool for people to apply and get the services that they're entitled to. But so the short takeaway on our sample was in 5 of the 6 instances, it was either very greatly delayed completion schedule or substantially over the initial budget. This image from the report, I'll flag, and we've got the red bars around the so-called business portal at the Secretary of State's office. And we're doing that not to be inflammatory, but to have kind of a good example of how dashboards and many of the visual tools that are used to try to help us better understand how things are going can be limited. So in this case, the business portal was supposed to be done, I believe, at the end of 2020. Things conspired in many ways, and to make a long story short, the project has now spent more than the initial budget. Nothing has been put online to be useful to a human being, and the project has now had to be cut in 2. They're having to bring in a different vendor to complete 1 phase, and they haven't even contemplated yet how they're going to do the 2nd phase. So we've blown way past the December of 2020. There's no question. And it reveals maybe some flaws in the way the project was initially designed with COVID money. People wanted to rush to get it done using eligible money. But the consequences now are that a lot of dollars have been spent and there's little for the public to see from it at present. However, if you look at this dashboard, and I think an earlier iteration was presented by the secretary, there's a date stamp in our report that I didn't include here just for space. But here, if you looked at this presentation, I don't think you would come across understanding just how badly this project has gone. So that's why one of the gory details of our audit explain the need to better define why someone would have a green status or a yellow status or a red status, and to include baseline information so that you can get a sense of where did things start here and where are they really now. And I was very grateful listening in that the secretary said that they're starting to move towards that vision. Here's another visual example.
I just want to make sure it's okay. It's okay. Okay. I was just wondering on that last one. I was just, I guess, hoping to explain better. When there's like it says 75% scope, and I understand you just said that it's like way off line and everything, but it says 75%, but then it's got a green check mark for scope, and then you're saying it's split into 2, but then the resource is a green check mark. And then the date is still 12/30. Like, so I think that's what you're getting at, but I'm just like, how is any of it? How can we trust any?
You can trust it by asking questions.
Okay.
And when they provide better information without you having to ask for it, it will reduce the number of questions you have to intuit on your own. I mean, that's the key piece.
Yeah.
Senator Brock was on the Senate floor. I remember this moment well, saying that the formation of this joint committee might be the most important thing we did in 1 year. History will judge whether that was an accurate statement. However, the rationale was that very few legislators walk into this building knowing the difference between a $10 and an $11 million IT project. What an additional $1 million of IT development means is incomprehensible to most of us. I won't presume to know about you guys. So having information presented in ways that communicate the reality to people who aren't IT specialists is so critical. And I'll touch on some of this a little bit when we get into the recommendations. A second visual, though, to highlight the same point. Every year, ADS is required to do, include in their annual report, sort of status reports on how the projects are going. So the bottom image here, the bottom block, is the 2023 IT summary report, where you'll see that this MMIS interoperability program had a green status. Great. Well, unless you track back to previous reports, you wouldn't know that the year before it was yellow, which usually signifies like much more than just it's not perfect, but it's kind of like there could be problems here. But the only substantial change that made it go from yellow to green is that they extended the expected end date of the project. So what was not going well became going well by virtue of saying, well, it's just going to take us another year, year and a half. Now, and I'm not picking on ADS. The point is just that you can't be expected to say, when you look at a green bar, should I trust that? Right? The best system is that you've been given the information to understand what might have caused this to be the assertion from the agency. Like in this instance, a simple note saying the project is now on target because we changed the length of time it's going to take would allow you to at least say, well, that doesn't seem like much of a change at all, but at least we know that. And then here's another instance of some of the reporting up till now that might not give you the complete picture. And I'm focusing specifically on the on-target projects, which it says 69.5%. Again, on-target projects, the practice has been to calculate that based on the revised project schedules and budgets, not the initial project schedules and budgets. So all of the projects could have blown past their budgets and their expected completion dates. Some of it could have happened not for good reasons, but just for incompetence. And yet you could still see a very high percentage for on-target projects, the way they've been calculating it before. Now, I'm not suggesting that in any of these instances, there's an attempt to be deceptive or disingenuous, but rather the weaknesses that could be improved to better serve your needs. So now I'm just going to quickly hit the 7 recommendations we made to the agency, and these fall broadly under your oversight function and also as your legislative duties when you come back in January, and then we had a few specific ones to the legislature. The first one is when the so-called ABC form is being developed. For anyone, I'll just, in shorthand, it's basically the project review form that ADS works with the host agency, the department that's going to run the program. They come up to decide whether it's worth doing the project, what the benefits are going to be. It's effectively a cost-benefit report. They are not always, in fact, they are almost never including, ADS is almost never including the host department's staff costs as part of the project costs when they decide what the costs and benefits are going to be. The logic explained to our office from the previous secretary was that those costs, say from the Department of Children and Families, are outside of ADS's control, which of course is true. But we said you can't really measure the total cost of the project without including all the costs of the project. And on the Child Development Division project in our sample, the departmental costs, not the ADS costs, the DCF costs of staffing specific to that project were over $500,000. So we're not talking incidental time spent, we're talking real money. So this would make it a much more clear and total picture when you're weighing whether or not to move forward with the project. The second, have the client agencies come up with performance measures that have baselines, quantify results, and are relevant to the project. That has not been true in most of the instances we sampled. 5 out of the 6 did not have very good measures, and I'll give 2 examples. In the case of the Cannabis Control Board system, their measure was that there would be additional revenues derived to the state as a result of doing the Cannabis Control Board portal that the applicants would use. But they had previously been collecting $0 in fees because there was no cannabis control board, there were no applications. So whether you did a paper form or you did an online form, we were going to have additional revenues to the state. So it's not a very meaningful measure to say it's going to bring in more money. It has nothing to do with the IT project. That just had to do with the creation of the legal retail market in the first place. The second example that I give, which is a simple one, is the Department of Liquor Control and Lottery. Their program, their measure included that it would reduce the amount of physical paperwork that was being generated. But they didn't say whether that was a big problem before and the extent to which it would actually change as a result of this project. So it might well be true that that would be a tremendous benefit, but it offered no way to actually judge whether the project was meeting its intended goals. The third recommendation is effectively what I was describing with the visuals from the report about including the annual in the annual report and all the other reporting baseline costs and schedule information to provide more transparency to the legislature and to the public. The fourth one actually is a quite simple one, and we were surprised that the agency, there might have been some kind of miscommunication because we were suggesting that for their own internal review of how the division is doing managing the projects, that they have effectively a running spreadsheet to see whether they were coming in on budget and on schedule, right? As we said before, there are often good reasons that those things aren't held, that the budget goes beyond what was expected or the schedule does. We were suggesting that they keep a running tally of how they were doing in that regard so that they could, as a team, see if there were reasons that explained why there were project delays, why there were budget overruns that could be addressed. The fifth one, this might seem a little esoteric, but the whole point of many of these IT projects is to achieve some objective, either for the staff or for clients who are served by a program or the general public. We don't often hear quite how that has been achieved after one of the projects is closed out. And what we learned is that the project management process, within 30 days of considering a project complete, that's when it asks the department to say whether the good things have sort of matriculated from the project, which is probably in almost every instance going to be too quick to really know whether the project has achieved its objective. So our recommendation was that there be a process over a little bit more time to determine whether the project has actually produced the desired results. The secretary, in his response to our audit, in this case, effectively said the statute doesn't require us to do it, and the reporting to us by a host department is something that's not really in our control. Our feeling that we expressed in our closeout meeting with the agency was that there are two entities of state government, all with a common objective. You have ADS people embedded in these departments on an ongoing basis. It's in everyone's interest to just figure this out. And just because statute doesn't require you to collaborate with another department, there is certainly no prohibition against doing good things with another department. And so we hope that that is one that there'll be progress on. The sixth, again, is back to sort of, there's a nuance here, but I don't think it's a good use of your time. The seventh piece is one that's relates to how contracts are being invoiced. And we found that there were a number of instances where invoices were going out before the deliverables associated with that payment had been completed. And so the agency's response was that they were going to tighten up their processes to make sure that someone was signing off on the deliverable having been received prior to sending out the payment for it, because that's obviously a problem.
Clarification, the invoices were being sent out, but were they being paid before?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, yeah, I was talking about the invoicing. The payments for the invoices were going out before the deliverables associated with, a lot of these contracts are structured, when 25% of it's completed, you will get 25% of the payment. Payments were going out, just to use that example, before there was 25% completed. So it was sort of a departure from what the contract was calling for. So In part, the three recommendations to the legislature are a result of ADS's response to the audit, which, and I don't want this to come off negatively because the work with the agency was very positive. And our closeout meeting with them, it was actually very engaging and very good. But the letter response from the agency kind of indicated two things that I've said, so I'll just reemphasize. One, that the statute didn't require certain of the recommendations we were making. So we are encouraging you to consider mandating those things in statute. The agency could do them anyways, but it might clarify things just to put it right in statute. And that's about the total cost of a project and making sure those are included when an ABC form is being completed, including the baseline cost and schedule in all of the statutory required reporting, and also the method of having a lengthier process to determine whether the actual results that were intended to be delivered by the project happened. So I tried to speak fast just in the interest of time. The report's actually quite interesting, even for someone who's not a tech. And so you've all betrayed something by being in the legislature, which is you don't mind a little nuance and grit on the policy front. So I recommend you look through there because there are some things you guys can know.
Yeah, I just want to thank you. I am a firm believer in ADS, helped, with the legislation to get that going. And I think this is welcome nuance in helping us do our job of oversight, which
Yeah,
also very important.
The Secretary's comments that many of these things are starting to try to incorporate. And if you look deep into the report, you'll see there were some recommendations we pulled because they took care of it in real time. So we don't leave the recommendation if they actually address it before we hit the send button to the legislature and to the governor. But I'm going to briefly turn to the two memos that were sent regarding the telecommunications plan. So we've received some constituent feedback with a variety of concerns about the state's 10-year telecom plan. This is a 10-year plan produced every 3 years. And so the review was of the 21 plan, and the sense was that it was good timing because the 24 plan is being drafted effectively as we speak, so that if we had anything that we learned from the 21 plan, those could potentially be applied and improved in the 24 plan. There were two. Actually, I'll skip to what we reported to the Commissioner of Public Service before I turn to the legislative issue. I would say that there were really two fundamental issues that we identified with the 21 plan that we think could be improved with the 24. The first is that there are sort of recommendations and suggestions scattered throughout the multi-100-page telecom plan. However, it is not always easy to tell what is actually a recommendation, what isn't. And the recommendations are often not quite as directive as the kind of, many of us, if we were to define what a recommendation is, it's this should happen because it will advance the cause that we're trying to do. Many of the recommendations were a little more equivocal than that. So it did not quite provide a sequential blueprint for the recommendations that would lead to furthering the state's telecom goals. That was essentially our assessment. The second is that there are no real performance measures in the plan at all. And that means that it's very hard to say to the Department of Public Service, congratulations, we think you're doing a good job because we had these objective measures to determine your performance and you've nailed it. Conversely, we can't say you've not done a good job because there's nothing to base their performance on. We believe, and so we suggested that as a kind of an analogous situation with some differences is the state's energy plan. Now, clearly there's some differences. We have regulated monopoly utilities and you can compel them to do certain things. So there's a much more direct link to the recommendations in the energy plan to the result of meeting the state's energy goals. However, as a result of having clear performance measures in the energy plan, you can say to the Department of Public Service, you've either done a great job or you've fallen down for not meeting those objective measures. There is no such set of measures in the telecom plan. the commissioner effectively responded by saying, well, telecom and utilities are different, and we can't compel many telecom providers to do certain things because they're beyond our regulatory reach, to which we said, of course, that's true. We're suggesting you come up with measures that are within state entities' control, whether it's public service department, whether it's the broadband board, whoever it is that has a piece that we can control, the measures would be very different. We're not going to compel something that's beyond the reach of state government. So we hope that the commissioner steps back with her team and says, like, how might we properly judge or be judged on our performance? The second thing, this is important, and it can quickly get lost almost as a nuance, but we think it's important for reasons we can't quite understand. The 10 goals in statute, the telecom goals for statute, have been sort of recrafted in the telecom plan into 6 different ones. And as a result, the plan, which is meant to drive towards those 10 goals, is harder to link to the specific goals. And as a result of making those modifications, certain things become de-emphasized. So affordability is something that's more prominent in the state's telecom goals, but then doesn't really show up in the plan quite as prominently. So the legislature, our recommendations to this committee and your standing committee peers, we had 2 specific things that relate to your work. One is the statute doesn't explicitly require recommendations to achieve the telecom goals in the plan. So we never suggested it. We just said it would be a good practice for them to do it, whether required or not. If they don't plan to do it, you may wish to require that. So it would be revisiting the statutes and adding that element. The second is there has been some ambiguity about just what is meant to be included in the telecom plan. 2 specific instances of confusion are public safety infrastructure and also infrastructure owned by entities that aren't quite state entities, but are like the state colleges. And I know that there have been issues that the legislature's had to contend with in the last year related to that infrastructure. So we're not opining on what that should look like, but if certain things are carved out of the telecom plan, it should be a deliberate action and not one that just happens by oversight or because no one raised the issue. And then I'm going to provide, go ahead.
Telecom plan.
Yep.
Matt? So I would just note that the telecom plan has not been reconciled with Act 71 or Act 79, which are significant reconfigurations of our goals and our investments. And I wonder if you have given any thought to that.
Well, when you say they have.
So like the existing statute that drives the creation of this plan, it's a dinosaur at this point, which is totally disconnected from our activities today. And, we are repeatedly reminded every year by, we have an individual that's obsessed with this statute and this plan that we're not following it. But it's no longer relevant in terms of what we're doing. Have you commented on that?
We know that there are sometimes, I don't want to say contradictions, but incompatibilities with 2 different legislative actions. And that's for the legislature to reconcile. I think it's cognitive dissonance. Is that what we would call it?
Yes.
Or genius, perhaps, as I think Einstein said, right? Holding 2 competing thoughts. So you guys can choose which one you're going to let that be. I can only tell you that our office also presented to the Government Accountability sort of Rethink Committee on Wednesday. And among other considerations we suggested, and they heard from this wonderful team in New Mexico. I thought that it was a very fascinating presentation. Those of you not on that committee should watch it. It's something that would be very hard for a standing committee to do, to like work its slow way through trying to reconcile these plans. Some group has to be charged with diving in and kind of cleaning that stuff up. I know there are political questions involved in all that, which makes it hard to. But our primary emphasis was not to solve the telecom plan issues, but to identify opportunities to move forward. The current contract, which is going to the same vendor, it's the same contract terms and everything. So unless the department steps in to try to, what we think, tidy up some of these pieces, this is not going to happen. And it's a lot of money And a lot of information in a report, if it's not useful, it raises questions about why the plan's being done in the first place, right? If it's not tied together with more modern thinking about this. But happy to continue the dialogue on that. Three brief updates just in closing. The VDOL UI overpayments, you heard about the modernization project, and I just wanted to give an example, these things that pop up sometimes in our work as ancillary issues, but speak to the IT oversight needs. As you may know, and we've communicated with the Labor Department and the respective standing committees, there are many thousands of Vermonters who were deemed to have UI overpayments back during the COVID era unemployment programs. And many of them have been receiving letters telling them that they owe a lot of money, even people who actually didn't make a mistake and there was a state mistake. As a result, some people have had their taxes offset and then they're being charged fees for the tax offset too. And so obviously if it's a fraudster, we're not concerned. We want the money back and we want them to feel that pain. But if it's someone who didn't commit any mistake, we're more concerned about that. DOL is moving forward with a quite expensive kind of mini module to address just that narrow issue of a couple thousand people, I think, to sort of adjudicate how much they owe and whether they should owe it. And we asked whether they had considered just doing it manually or having a firm come in and clean up that operation. And they just hadn't. And so it raises a broader question sometimes of whether when an IT solution is identified as needed, whether a first question is asked is there a simpler, cheaper way of doing this? Could we just send a letter to these people rather than come up with a more complicated IT system, which could end lots of costs? So that's more of just an anecdote to highlight a small example, but indicative of some of the larger themes you've been talking about. The broadband report, which came out early in your last legislative session, I just wanted to provide an update on that, which is to say, we were very happy to work both with the Community Broadband Board and the staff level people at PSD on it, and want to commend the leadership of the board and this, the board itself and Patty Richards and others. They methodically went through each of the 10 risks we suggested mitigating, talking about either what was in place to try to address those things, what might be done, and to have a thoughtful discussion about it. So that's exactly the kind of response that an audit office hopes will happen. It doesn't mean that they will agree with everything we've said, but to go through and challenge themselves to determine whether they could improve something or change a practice is exactly what we would expect of the government department. The final piece, this comes up, it might not be well known, but the firm that we hire to do the state's single audit and the state's annual comprehensive financial report, it's called CLA. They do many states' single audits. There's an IT review portion of the annual comprehensive financial report, so it wouldn't seem intuitive that there's an IT review. One of the findings that will be in this year's report is that the security standards which guide all state departments hasn't been changed since January of 2020 and hadn't been revisited. So that's something that the best practice is that every year that is looked at to make sure that you're not missing any advances in either cyber threats or encryption recommendations, passwords. I believe they're in the process, and I couldn't quite tell if the secretary was referring to the same thing in her comments, but they have told us that they're working on the newest version, but it's not in time for the year that we were looking at, so it's going to show up as a finding, but just wanted to give you a heads up at that time. So, they're a busy agency, they have a lot going on, but obviously if there's a shortcoming in something like cybersecurity, it becomes the only thing, not just one of many things.
One of the things that I'm concerned about is communications about cyber amongst the three branches. Have you done any auditing of their communications infrastructure around breaches?
CLA goes through a series of internal control questions. So I don't know if it's specifically responsive to your question, but they will basically reach out in months in advance to the host agency and say, here are the 20 specific required best practices to ensure that you have proper controls in place to do these things. Please don't tell, and the great thing about audit work is that we don't say, filibuster for an hour and then we all nod our heads and we like you, so we go away. It's you have to actually submit. Not that that has ever happened in a legislative hearing. Not that I've ever done it. But they have to submit actual documentation that these things are in place. So I don't know the nature of every single one of those questions they ask. I'm happy to get the list and send it to you, and then you can tell me if there's something additive that we could ourselves explore on your behalf.
Yeah, it's hard for us to know if the communications are appropriate around cyber.
When you say communications, do you mean that they're secure, or the nature of what people are communicating about?
Well, they actually spoke no, not the nature of who and when is being contacted. So, and the secretary spoke to this morning, but, specifically I'm concerned about if there's a cyber breach and the administration is aware of that, when and how does the speaker become aware of that, or the pro tem? If this happens with judiciary, same thing. And, I think that's the nature of it.
I'll talk to the folks at CLA. I suspect that's not one of their items.
I don't even know if that's appropriate
for you. As it relates to cross branches, I suspect that's not the case internally.
A couple of questions regarding reviews. Do you do any of the work that you do, either with the comprehensive financial audit or otherwise, take a look at how agencies hire independent contractors to keep them on track as to how well things are going, what's being done, and so on? These are supposed to be independent reviews. Have you satisfied yourselves that they are in fact independent and that they're adequate?
What we do know is that for projects over a certain threshold, there is a requirement that there be an independent reviewer unless it's waived for some documented reason by the secretary, which I don't know how frequently that happens, to be honest. The projects that we reviewed that required independent reviewers had them. I don't know that we would be in a position to say whether it was satisfactory. We just know that the projects were often budget and over schedule, and there were often explanations. But in terms of independence, I can't say that we've encountered a situation where independence was not, where there was a problem with independence.
Or a concern in terms of just how the contract, for example, for the independent reviews was led. Was it in fact a process that you believe was independent?
We would have to do a specific look.
Source, those kinds of things. And you basically attach a skeptical eye to independence.
The short answer is we would have to think about a targeted analysis of that.
Second question is, do you do any pre-implementation reviews of large-scale system projects yourselves? And if not, should you?
We could. I think to the extent we do, it's not full-blown reviews, but providing some kind of consulting advice to the department.
Typically go in after the fact, after the battle is over, and count the bodies, and then measure the number of bullet holes, as opposed to saying, well, this project is underway, and here's some major flaws in it that we see right now before it's finished. And I know that there's some audit shops and some audit operations that do in fact do that. And I'm just wondering if you haven't done that, is that something that you may think about?
We certainly can think about it. I think it would have to be on specific projects of a particular either importance or priority of the legislature to make it worth it. Because the other piece we would want to avoid is certainly the independent. So independence is at the core of what the auditor's office does. So many people think that the audits that you see and that are in the news are written by Doug Hoffer or Randy Brock or Tom Salmon. No, these are written by nonpartisan, non-political auditors who follow a set of professional standards which are on our website, which is a dense, you are not wanting to read this professional standards manual. It's very detailed, and it's all driven towards making sure that you're only reporting the facts. And so the independence of the reviewer that ADS is required to hire, that is to make sure that they're getting non-biased assessments of the solution that they think they're looking for. You now have a staff, as of, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago when first Dan Smith and now Lisa, sorry, we haven't met before, now have some capacity to do real-time analysis before things go too wrong in some direction. Adding us would, or someone we hire on your behalf, is certainly possible. The question is, we would want to make sure it's not duplicating those efforts, because 3 independent reviews might be overkill unless there's a specific project with failure of which would be a real problem from your point of view. So open to it, and just identify when that might be appropriate. We can talk about it.
Other questions? Okay.
Okay.
Mike reminded me the presentation and the memos are on the Jitoc page, so if anybody is looking for those. Thank you, Tim. Is there anything else you wanted to leave us with?
I just want to say that it's been great to spend my afternoon with you.
Thank you for coming in. Next up, we've got Hunter Thompson from the department.
The online agenda to be more accurate, reflective of what the days looked like.
Splendid, thank you.
So if you pull it up, that'll kind of keep us on track.
Sorry for my clumsiness here. And by the way, that if you really want to look me up, the laptops that the state has are bigger than virtually any carrying case that's convenient to have, which is why you see my barbecue tote, which makes me look like I've wandered in here and used the bathroom or something.
Yeah. And Hunter, did you have any presentation materials?
I don't know.
See what we can do.
Director, I'm Hunter Thompson, Director of Telecommunications and Connectivity with the Public Service Department. It started, I can give you a little of my background. You have to bear with me. This is my first time presenting at Jitoc. So I've been a state employee for 21 years. In technology, I started with the Agency of Digital Services. I worked for the Agency of Agriculture as the IT lead. I did a fair amount of work in COVID for the Department of Labor to try to help folks get the help they needed during the pandemic. And eventually I find myself here at the Public Service Department, the Director of Telecommunications and Connectivity. Also soft-spoken. If you can't hear me, just tell me to speak up. I apologize. Other experiences in the private sector, in the telecom sphere specifically. I was at IBM, where the chips I made wound up in a lot of Nortel phones in Canada when Nortel was a telecom company. They also wound up in Nintendo GameCube, which I find is a better claim to fame than defunct telecom. But I've got a little experience doing this. Since this is my first Jitoc, I was going to go through what we're currently doing at the Public Service Department, some stuff I'd like to do, and then offer a brief response to the auditor's office memo. So what we're currently doing at the Public Service Department, what we're working on is a 248A study. H110 was passed to extend the sunset of 248A another 3 years, and part of that required the Public Service Department to do a study to solicit input, and I'll quote this so I don't get it wrong, to address ways to make the process easier to participate in for municipalities and individuals, and how to encourage municipal participation, and recommend any necessary updates to the 30 VSA 248A. So we've been having listening sessions with the public. We have put out surveys to the municipalities through the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, and we've got hold of Power Connections within the telecom industry and offered up a survey as well as the opportunity for them to submit comments in writing back to the department. We're going to put that report together, and that's going to be delivered on or before January 15th. as it relates to 248A. The other project that we're currently doing is broadband mapping. We are statutorily required to provide a map of broadband availability. So we've been doing that. The previous incumbent who did that work left the department shortly after I came on as telecommunications director. So we are engaging with a vendor this time around to do that work. And we're doing that kind of in conjunction with the Vermont Community Broadband Board to make sure that we have a cohesive map of where there is broadband available in the state of Vermont for 2023. So in terms of what I would like to do in the future in my role as telecom director is one of the reasons I came on board as telecom director is I worked on the first drive test when I was at ADS with the previous incumbent Corey Chase, who went to the public service department. And I found that intriguing. I still don't have cell phone access at my house, and I live about 5 minutes from here. It takes me 5 to 7 minutes to drive to work, and I cannot get a cell phone signal in my living room. So I would like to do another drive test to keep this data accurate. The last one was done in 2022, and the data is already outdated. I'm hoping to find a different methodology to engage Vermonters and kind of try to crowdsource the drive test. I would like to get the public involved. I would like to get the citizens of the state involved in a mechanism by which they can say, I do or don't have service at my house, and then we'll provide a way to record that and produce a map. You know, last time we went out with the Agency of Transportation and we got a large amount of roads covered, but given the rural nature of our state and the amount of dirt roads that we have, unless we're able to engage everybody to help us do this, we're not going to be able to get a full accurate map of statewide coverage. I've only been here 6 months, so that's all I've had planned so far in the 6 months. So the future concerns that I see coming up for the Public Service Department and the telecom is one, the USF. I won't make a suggestion on how to fix the USF, but the USF is underfunded. The Universal Service Fund needs some way to be shored up to cover its financial obligations in the future. We administer the USF, and I am a public servant at heart. I will faithfully execute what statute tells me about the USF to do. But just as something that you at the legislative level should give some thought to. That this is a fund that was designed on a technology that is moving away, you know, and that leads to the next piece, which is we have telephone services and video services that are slowly or rather quickly moving into the realm of data services, where the Public Service Department is preempted from regulating, right? So we continue to see cable television subscriptions decline and video on demand and video through data services being delivered to homes. Anyone who has a Netflix subscription gets video over a data service. Those services are not subject to the gross receipts tax fee that largely funds the Public Utilities Commission and the Public Service Department. So that's just something, again, to be aware of, is that we have seen a trend of declining cable revenues due to declining cable television services as people move to video on demand and video as a data service. And that's another thing that the legislature might want to take into account as it looks at finding funding sources to move forward. And then the final one, which I'm not going to say a lot because it just happened this week, is as most of you are aware, Consolidated has been acquired by Searchlight Capital. We at the department are aware of this, and while it's too early to provide a comment or to speculate, we are going to keep a close eye on it. It's as tactful as I can be on that one. I just found out, I got called by Consolidated and left a message, I think Tuesday when I was in another meeting, but that's something we're aware of and something we're going to keep. A couple other plugs is for the Public Safety Network and FirstNet. So the state entered into an agreement with FirstNet, utilizing a lot of money that the federal government gave FirstNet to deploy cell phone service. And I think that's been a big boom for the state. We're able to see that in the coverage maps as they change. And we're able to see that just in the fact that I guess we have less dead zones for first responders, would be a good way to put that. You know, FirstNet's been a successful program. They're about to get another influx of money. They had a debrief, I think, 2 or 3 weeks ago in Waterbury, which explained what they've done so far in conjunction with AT&T for the state of Vermont. They were less willing to give us a commitment on how much money they were getting and how much money they were going to invest in the second round of FirstNet funding from the feds. But one of the things to keep in mind is that as that money comes in, I do believe it would be useful to either reconvene or convene the same type of committee which was first designed to decide the original FirstNet tower sightings. So when the FirstNet money from the state first came in, a committee was convened and it was decided between Public Service Department, Public Safety and some other players. This is the ideal location, given that we have this certain amount of money. New money comes in, I think we as a state of Vermont should get a say in how that is spent. So I think reconvening that committee to make those recommendations back to FirstNet once again and say, these are the gaps that we still see. And this is where we think coverage is most important to cover the public safety piece. Yes, Representative Sevilla.
And what are the impediments to reconfiguring that committee? Are you able to do it? Do you need us to empower you?
I think we just need to be empowered. I think that it was convened and then with the first round of FirstNet, it went away. So we just need to be told to convene it again.
So I would love to invite you to propose that to the standing committees. And also, as the regulator, with all of these federal funds coming in, we heard again this morning that with outages, et cetera, it's hard to get that information, which is outrageous.
Yep.
Considering the amount of public funds that have gone in to that. So,
I agree.
and I hope that related to the consolidated sale, given their extremely poor track record and the multiple service quality investigations that have happened in the state of Vermont, that the department will be really diligent in looking at consumer protection and maintenance of their products.
So I will say that while I've only known about that acquisition since Tuesday, I've already discussed those topics with a few people within the department on how we can make sure to hold the people that acquire Consolidated accountable, or where we held them accountable, but where they just underperformed or didn't perform previously. So that's definitely on the forefront.
I feel like that might be a little too light. I mean, people have been harmed by Consolidated.
So to briefly touch on the flooding event. The wireless telecommunications infrastructure within the state largely weathered the storm, no pun intended, fairly well. We had a couple outages. Most of the outages were fixed fairly quickly, and the outages that took longer to fix were often the result of a lack of physical access to the site. So for instance, we had an outage at a tower in Northfield, I believe, and it took 3 days to get resolved, but not because the issue was a 3-day fix, because it took 2.5 days to get the road built back up enough so that someone could actually physically get out to the location. Up in the Northeast Kingdom, we saw a bit longer of an outage where the storm took out, I believe, 1.5 miles of fiber optic cable, which was used for backhaul. So it took fixing the roads to get the availability for crews to get in there. And then it took time for those crews to restring that fiber optic cable to restore that service. But by and large, we found that the wireless communication infrastructure weathered well. Didn't prepare a ton. So, the last piece is the memo from the auditor's office on the 248A plan. We did appreciate the second memo, and there seemed to be some misunderstanding in the intention and reception of the earlier criticisms of the 2021 plan. We appreciate the second memo sent on October 16, 2023, which offers some clarification on those points. And given that clarification, I have read and reviewed both memos and appreciate the work done by the auditor's office to offer its opinion on opportunities it sees for improving the 2024 plan above and beyond what statute requires. I meet with the vendor of the 2024 plan on a regular basis. We have a group meeting and I talk to them on a regular basis, both before the memos came out and after the memos came out. And we've discussed some of these criticisms and we are going to do our best to address them. As I said, I speak fast. That's all I got. This is my first rodeo. Hopefully it was all right. Questions?
In terms of the department's response to the auditor's report about the telecom plan, is it your position that you concur with and agree with the recommendations and findings in the plan, or are there some that you disagree with, and if so, what are they?
So I disagree with the basic premise that the plan didn't meet the statutory requirement. I think that was expressed fairly well in the memo from the Public Service Department back to the auditor's office. I do agree that potentially performance measures are useful. Let me take that back. I agree performance measures are useful, right? There's no potentially about it. I am unsure exactly how to incorporate those into the 2024 plan at this point, but that's something we took away and that's something that we're looking at to make sure that we give it due diligence.
Well, I think one of the overarching pieces of the plan is, for example, that we should promote competitive choice. Does the department do that? Does the plan do that, and how?
So in terms of the plan promoting competitive choice, I'd have to go through and find the specific sections. I have it, but I don't think it's appropriate to go through and read a memo in front of you all.
In other words, how do you know whether or not you've done that? How do you know, in fact, if one of the goals is competitive choice, how do you measure? Is there going to be something that will tell us this is how you know what you do or you don't?
In the plan, in the 2024 plan? So you're requesting a performance measure to see if we've actually met competitive choice within the 2024 plan?
And so will the, anticipate having some form of measurement?
Anticipate having some sort of performance measures in the 2024 plan. I won't commit to exactly what they are yet because we're going through this process and working through them.
Well, I guess that's one issue. The other issue is whether or not some of the things in the plan should remain there. You know, if you don't know whether or not you're going to be able to accomplish them, or there's no plan to in fact accomplish them. I'm not sure. I'm hard pressed at what's the plan in the existing plan for achieving competitive choice.
We'll make sure that's addressed in the 2024 plan.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Brock. I think you've really helped put a good issue right on the table related to my previous comments with the auditor, which are the inconsistencies between this very old statute around the telecommunications plan and Act 71 and Act 79, which, as you know, having been part of crafting and getting those passed, we brought those forward because there is not a competitive market. And in fact, I think that is one of the aspects that actually needs to be removed from the telecommunications plan, the promotion of competition that is happening on its own where it is viable, and where it is not, we now have hundreds of Vermonters standing up, building this with massive amounts of taxpayer dollars. And so I don't think that is accounted for in the plan. And I think for me, thinking about how we structure this statute or amend the statute going forward, I think is really important.
So I'd like to point out that the 2021 plan was compiled as Act 71 was being discussed and being passed. So the 2021 plan had to take into account the fact that it might include something that directly went against the legislation that was eventually passed that became Act 71. So I think there was a balancing act that was happening in that plan, along with, this is not an excuse, COVID. It was much more difficult to compile that plan given the pandemic, given Act 71 being discussed. And I think that we will have a different result with the 2024 plan. I'll do my best. This is my first one.
Senator?
Thank you. I have several questions. I hear a lot from residents in my 4 rural towns about the lack of broadband, and I'm wondering, since you've hired a vendor, is there someone they can contact to say, don't forget me and my street, or how does that work?
For the
How will they be
broadband,
found?
the
Yes.
fiber to the home.
How will they be found? Right.
So I will defer that to Christine.
Okay.
Yeah,
Wait,
hold
wait a minute. I can wait on that. Okay. You mentioned FirstNet for cell service. I have an entire town of 2,000 people that their own first responders couldn't talk to each other for 3 days over Christmas because they had no cell service. How do we prioritize towns like that? And again, I'm very willing to talk to anyone at FirstNet or whoever convenes to make sure that they're under consideration.
So I think we prioritize those by reconvening the committee to decide where the appropriate place for this next round of FirstNet deployments is.
And I wouldn't want them to forget this Chittenden County town because it's easy to believe that Chittenden County has it all and this rural town is not.
Yep.
Finally, if I may,
Please.
consolidated. went to install lines in a few people's rural yards and went up their driveways, caused a lot of erosion, did not call dig safe before they dug, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I will be getting paperwork to back all those claims up from one of the people who was affected. What is the recourse? They were fined $100, which will come out of customers' pockets, right? I mean, it's not, there's, who holds their feet to the fire? Who makes that company correct?
I believe a combination of the Public Service Department and the Public Utilities Commission have the authority to hold Consolidated accountable when they make it.
Does the customer call them? Do I call them? Who, where, how, what is the flow, I guess?
The process I've seen so far is that we receive a complaint through our Consumer Affairs and Public Information Division.
Super.
It gets routed to the appropriate people. We reach out to the utility and then that starts the conversation. And then if it needs to be escalated, it gets escalated, and if it needs to go to the Public Utilities Commission, it goes to the Public Utilities Commission.
Thank you.
We have whole web pages devoted to instructing our clients how to file complaints about Consolidated. We'd be happy to share those.
Thank you.
They can call me directly. I'm happy to
Great.
send them.
Thanks.
Okay. With that, we're slightly ahead of the revised schedule.
You, Hunter.
Well, I'd like to hear from Christine and then see where we're at.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
We're at the presentation. Mike's going to run through the presentation for us.
And it is on our website if anybody's looking to pull it up independently.
Anyway, I'm Christine Hallquist. I'm the executive director of the Vermont Community Broadband Board. My history with broadband goes way back. I don't even want to tell you how old I am, but the starts in 2000. I was the CEO of Vermont Electric Cooperative in 2003 when the board of directors asked me, what can we do to get broadband to rural Vermonters? And I've been working on it ever since. Of course, I was the Democratic candidate for governor in 2018. That was the main part of the platform, get every Vermonter connected to fiber optic broadband, because I think it's the only way for our economic future, personally. I took a brief stint up from Canada to do a joint venture to develop new battery technology. Came back and became the executive director for NEK Broadband in Lamoille. And then our governor, who I ran against in 2018, appointed me to this position in 2021. And I think we Vermonters should be very proud of the fact that that's how our government works. So and I'm very honored to do what I believe, forgive my bias, but I think is the most important thing to happen for rural Vermont, rural America since the FDR in 1935 signed the executive order to get electrification in rural America. And we have, we have a very strong board. The board was, I was appointed by the governor. Governor appointed 2 board members. House appointed a board member. The Senate appointed a board member. And the CUDs appointed a board member. And we have on the line here, we have Tony Clitheroe. She's our attorney, our general counsel to answer questions. Rob Fish is our deputy director. And then we've got Ellie DeVilliers here, who is the representing the CUDs. So I think we can, hopefully have enough collective brain power to answer any question you have. So next slide. Yeah. Oh. Next slide. Yeah. So anyway, I don't think I need to convince any of you how important broadband is to Vermont. And I really thank the Joint Information Technology and Operations Committee for focusing on these important issues. If I look at why Searchlight bought Consolidated, because they recognize that everything is going to be about data in the future. And it is, again, it's the most important thing for moving forward. I'll tell you in my words what the role of the Vermont Community Broadband Board is. It's to get everybody connected to fiber optic broadband. And I want to point out we're the only state in the union that has set that goal. It's to make it affordable and then maximize positive social value. How does this benefit Vermonters? Next slide. So back to the beginning, which is the incredible foresight of the legislature in Vermont. And I always tell us not to get too big ahead because we're only 630,000 people or something like that. We ought to be able to get together, right? Well, we did have some incredible foresight here. Back at the beginning in 2015, the legislature formed communication union districts. That was legislation that allowed any two towns to get together or more to form a municipal district in order to get broadband to rural Vermonters. Because at that point, the legislature recognized it just wasn't going to happen with telecom providers. And I will tell you, of course, it's not going to happen because the costs are so high, and I'll get to that in a minute. The next step, of course, wait, maybe I didn't finish that. Yeah, so anyway, today we have 218 of our 252 towns and members of the district. And next slide, please. So the VCBB was established by legislation in 2021, Act 71, which addressed a variety of issues related to broadband and tasked the Vermont Community Broadband Board with resolving those issues. Next slide, please. I talked about the mission. Here's the formal mission. That's it. I won't read it through. It's in your slide deck. I want to give plenty of time for you to ask any detailed and hopefully difficult questions. Next slide, please. From transparency, I will emphasize that we're 26 months old. We started August 3rd, 2021. We've had 55 meetings of the board, 4 hours each. So think about that, 26 months, 55 meetings, 4 hours each. It's been a very active board, very, very involved. We knew, remember we started during COVID. It was a crisis getting broadband to Vermonters. We focused on getting that started, getting the CUD started. And of course, now the board has been doing really deep and hard work on focusing on accountability measures. It's not that we didn't have those before, but because of the staff, we built those in. But now that we've got things moving, we're taking a deep dive to make sure we're addressing all these issues, including consumer standards, construction standards, the annual report to the legislature, what kind of measures need to be in there, what kind of performance needs to be reported in there. Our grantee agreements, going through those thoroughly to make sure we've got everything covered. And one of the things that the board is addressing is a lien in Act 71. It talks about what happens if the CUD fails. How do we recover from that? So we're working on that as well as a sunset provision. We're scheduled to sunset in 2029. And what do we do after that? Because these CUDs are going to still exist, and how we'll make recommendations to the legislature how best to handle it. We've done extensive outreach. I'll get into the upcoming funding from the Infrastructure Investment and Job Tax Program, which is known as BEAD. We've got $229 million coming from there. So we've done extensive public engagement to develop that plan. Next slide, please. This shows you where we are. This is a map showing all the communication unit districts. It shows that 5 of the 10 districts are in construction right now. One has been completed. Southern Vermont is now 100% connected to fiber optic broadband. I should say with the exception of 17 addresses that are being fed from New York State, but we're working on it right now. But a very good accomplishment. If we look where we are today, by the end of the year, we'll have 33,000 additional addresses connected to fiber optic broadband. We talked to the administration, the governor, to say, measure us on connecting to fiber. There's all this confusion about whether you're underserved at 25.3 or 120 or et cetera. We think if it's not fiber, it's not broadband. And by the end of the year, 40% of Vermonters will be connected to broadband, which is quite an accomplishment. When I talk about the 33,000, remember there's only 310,000 what we call broadband serviceable locations in the state. So, let me just also give you another number. There were 64,000 underserved addresses. By the end of the year, we're going to have 8,124 connected. That's with the CUDs, which kind of gets us 12% there. We theoretically should be at 20% if we were running full speed. The startup was expected to be a little slower because we had to do a lot of interconnectivity. However, that 12% is a pretty good number because those are the numbers that we have reported, but we don't know what the private telecom companies are doing. So we'll get that report from the PSD at the end of the year. So we think we're right on schedule. Think things are moving fast. I'm very proud of the fact that the most challenging district, NEK Broadband with 57 towns, is right where they should be in terms of schedule. And what I guess I won't I won't go any further with the numbers, but I think you had a question.
You had said 40,000 connected to broadband, or was it 40,000 connected to fiber?
40% of Vermonters will be connected to fiber by the end of the year.
Yes, to fiber.
To fiber, yeah. So again, the statistics are we have 10 districts, 260 member towns. Another thing I'd like to be proud of the fact is we have 428 volunteers working across the state on these boards to make this happen. The CUDs cover more than 76% of the population, 93% of the unserved services. So we get, but these white areas, for example, Chittenden County, you have pockets in Chittenden County that aren't being served, Essex not being served right yet. We will address those. In the BEAD program, when I get to the BEAD program, that the $229 million coming from the IIJA, that we're setting up competitive grant programs that will allow the pockets even in these non-CUD areas to get served. The requirement of the federal BEAD program is universal service in the entire state. So so that covers everything, including off-grid addresses. Now we won't be running fiber to every off-grid address, but we will have a solution. We call them extremely high-cost locations. When they get over a certain cost threshold, we'll have an alternative solution. So even off-grid folks will get a solution. Next slide, please. So this is our website. You can see what what the progress we're making. We've allocated $150 million in grants so far. We plan to have the rest of all of our ARPA funds allocated by the middle of next year. It's just to give you the numbers on this one and to show you where we are. When we presented to the legislature 2 years ago and last year, we said we anticipated $350 million in grant funding in order to get us a $550 million project accomplished. To accomplish this goal of getting fiber connected to everybody in the state, previous estimate was $550 million. That's working collaboratively and in partnership with our existing providers. One of the things we know is that today, we know that Consolidated is going to replace all their copper with fiber. And in the areas where it makes sense from a financial standpoint, that allows us to focus on the areas that they're not going to get to. So that allows us to maximize the use of these funds. So the number I gave a couple of years ago 2 years ago to the end last year was that if we tried to do this all ourselves, the community networks throughout the state, it'd be $1.2 billion. We do it collectively together, it's $550 million. We needed to get 60% of those funds through grants in order to stand up these communication union districts. So let's go back to those numbers again. $350 million for $550 million was a $200 million gap. I'm proud to say that while the costs have got increased to $630 million, we've actually got grants, total up all of our grants that are approaching $530 million. So we took that $200 million gap in grant funding and now it's only $100 million. So we're much better off than we thought we were in terms of grant funding. So I'm here to report that we've got the money to do it. We've got the board appreciate all the oversight that we have because this is such an important project. I'm much more fascinated by what people tell me we're doing wrong than what we're doing right. Because that's the opportunity. So, next slide, please. So I want to talk about the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. This is the infrastructure, this comes out of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. There's going to be $42.5 billion spent nationwide to get broadband to all the rural areas. The priorities are to first make sure we hit all the unserved locations. Second, make sure we hit the underserved locations. And third, provide service to the community anchor institutions, what they, CII is what they use as an acronym. Now, for us as a state, we've tried to identify a CII, for example. So is where the requirement for a community anchor institute is that you get 1 gig service to each one of these key institutions. So schools, for example, town offices. We've identified parks. We've actually gone through this list and identified 4 more categories of community anchor institutions than any of the other states have. The reason we're doing that, first of all, we can because we're getting fiber broadband to everybody anyhow. But secondly, because we know that we need to provide higher levels of wireless access. You know, in Vermont, we have the large percentage of transient population, and we have a large percentage of homeless population. And so we're, as part of the equity component, is we're focusing on how do we provide access for everyone. And I'll get a little bit into the equity program in a minute, because if you look at broadband equity, access and deployment, the B without the equity is bad. Say more about that in a minute. Because we're not here to, I mean, we are here to connect everybody from broadband, but we're actually here to improve the lives of Vermonters. That's what we're here for. So I talked about the $229 million. One of the things I'm very proud of, we had expected about $150 million for this program, but we engaged Vermonters and we engaged with the PSD and the staff engaged on a challenge process to get more money. The way this works is and I'll talk more about this in a moment too, in terms of consumer protection. The way broadband works today is you get an advertised speed, and of course we all know you don't get the advertised speed that you sign up for. And I'll steal one of Rob Fish's examples. Rob says, you know, this is kind of insane because you don't go to the store and buy a gallon of milk and say, you're going to get up to a gallon of milk. And then you get home and you find out what it is, right? So what we asked Vermonters to do, and we all did, is we said, look, your advertised speed is 25.3. Tell us what you're really getting. And then we pushed back on the Federal Communications Commission map because every underserved address was worth money. We figured about $7,000. So every single address we could identify that was not truly getting the service that was advertised, we could pick up another 7,000. So we actually picked up about another 79 million as a result of that project. And we also have $30 million appropriated last year by the legislature, which we used to leverage these federal funds. The $229 million requires a 25% match from the state. And we came into the legislature last year and asked for 30 million, which you gave us, thank you. And that 30 million you understood, we all understood, is to leverage these other funds. Now, the governor's office reallocated 20 million of that because of the emergency flood relief, but with a promise they're going to put it back in. So you'll see that coming in the Budget Adjustment Act. So next slide. So the BEAD and Digital Equity Program is carried out by the NTIA. The NTIA is the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. They're tasked with doing this through the entire country and some of the territories. So if you look, there's about 57. We have 50 states, but there's 57 if you include territories and tribal lands. And I will say the NTIA is a pretty marvelous program. I think the NTIA has done an incredibly good job of putting putting together a boilerplate of what we have to follow. Now, because that boilerplate, there's problems with it, of course, anytime you put a boilerplate. But we're following the boilerplate, which they've established, which is, first of all, we were required to submit a 5-year action plan, which we've done. We do an initial proposal, volume 1, which you can see that says identification of the under and unserved locations, blah, blah, blah. That we've submitted. We're in the middle of working on initial proposal, volume 2, which we plan on submitting at the end of November. And then, and I will show you where we are. We're actually, out of those 57 states and territories, we're in the top 7. Which you can see, this is directly, I think that's 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, yes. So we didn't show you all the states on here, but this is right off the NTIA website. And there's Vermont. So we've done volume 1, just show you progress-wise, we're kind of ahead of the pack. I should pause and see if Rob, you have anything to add to that? Okay. Okay. So if you look at the BEAD funding flow, we've got $229 million appropriated. We're designing the program as we speak. Rob, I'm going to have you take the slide. Or unless you want me to keep it. The Legislative Joint Committee, I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah, I'm thinking that that's a typo.
Okay.
Slide. That should be the NTIA.
Oh, yeah, all right, good, that's, all right, thank you, because I was like, wait a minute, I don't know legislative judgment, thanks, okay, I'm good. So the BEAD program design, then the NTIA, sorry about that, was a cut and paste issue. It's not the Legislative Joint Committee, it's the NTIA approves the BCBD BEAD program. And then the funds flow on reimbursement basis to Vermont, they do not pass to the Vermont Community Broadband.
Okay. Yeah, it doesn't end up going through the community.
Oh, that's right. That's the Act 71 legislation.
Rob,
So
sorry to interrupt. Would you mind just introducing yourself for the record?
Sure, I'm sorry. I'm Rob Fish. I'm the Deputy Director at Vermont Community Broadband.
Thank you.
yeah, and we're struggling with this because this is something important for the legislature to know is that these BEAD funds don't go through the board. They go directly on a reimbursement basis to those bidders who are successful in the bidding program. And that's all part of the legislation written by the NTIA. And then,
Christine?
yeah.
Yeah, could you just explain like where it comes from? So where that reimbursement comes from?
It comes from the $229 million that was allocated from the IIJA and managed and
Who's making those? Who's sending those things out if it's not going through the board?
The funds will come from the NTIA. The board will be
Got
involved
it.
in selection process. The selection process is very formulaic, but the board will certainly be involved.
Thank you.
and so that gets down to this is where the board's involvement in is we're selecting sub-grantees in a competitive process that complies with the BEAD NOVO and the VCBB mission. We have to put, the Act 71 is a piece of legislation that's really forward-thinking. And we've worked closely with the NTI for them to recognize that we have two masters here, as a VCBB. Our master is the legislature and the NTIA rules. So we've worked very hard to put those two together and make it work. We are successful in putting that together by how we're planning to develop the bidding process. Next slide. So as soon as we get our I'm going way too much detail there, I think, but all right. So we're gonna get we get automatic. I'm sorry, I'm going way too much detail for you.
Things are getting too interesting.
Essentially, we're getting $100 million immediately in June is the plan. We submit our initial proposal of the available amounts. We do our state challenge process. I don't think this is right, is it?
I'll just give I'll just give a quick overview of where we're at. We've submitted the 5-year plan, initial proposal 1. We're going to be submitting volume 2. Once we submit that and volume 1 is approved, we'll be starting a challenge process that's where we make changes. We come up with the final list of addresses that are eligible for this funding. And there's a waiting period, and we also have to wait for the waiting period after the challenge, and we have to wait for the NTA to formally approve our sub-grantee selection process. This is volume 2. We're expecting by the middle of next spring, we'll be doing that sub-grantee selection process of picking who the funds are going to go to. The funds we expect to be available towards the end of summer next year. It's kind of where we're at with things. There's the potential to get 20% of the funding a little bit earlier for specific projects that will also be working.
Yeah, I have some. This was far too much detail for you. I'm sorry. It's life. So digital divide's the issue, digital equity is the goal, digital inclusion is the work. What do we mean by this slide? This gets to the equity part of the BEAD Equity Access and Deployment Act. I talked about the $42.5 billion that the federal government has allocated for infrastructure. They've also allocated $1.44 billion as a block grant to the states to address the digital divide and the equity issues. And out of that, if we use the same formula that they used to give the $229 million, if we take that $1.44 billion, we should expect somewhere around $12.4 million to address the digital equity and digital divide. I'll talk more about the plan we're doing on how to allocate that money. But let me talk about the goal here. If we look at the people that are not served today, the digital divide is the economic divide. People who are not served today represent more than double the number of low-income people that are served. And if we throw energy burden on top of the Northeast Kingdom, things even look worse, right? From a cost of living standpoint. So the goal here is to provide those people from targeted marginalized populations, which have been identified by the NTIA. For example, they incarcerated individuals, people on parole, migrant workers, and all those marginalized communities. We want to provide them the resources. So just getting people connected doesn't solve the problem. Because if you've never used a computer before, the first thing you are is afraid to use it, right? So it's providing those digital navigators to help people use the technology, providing those devices and providing the opportunity. An interesting statistic I saw is that we might have thought that the internet was just used for comics and porn or something in the past, right? But you heard that in the past. People joke about it. Well, the reality today is half of the transactions you're doing are related to your finances. People are now relying heavily on the internet for finances. So if you're on the other side of the economic divide, you don't have those tools available to you. So,
Christine, I'm just going to share just a quick story that I heard recently at an event with CB Fiber that really put this in perspective for me. Is there was a woman who was in the final stages of a remote job. She's really excited, lived in an area without good connectivity. At the last interview, they asked her to do a speed test, and she didn't get the job as a result. So just to bring it closer to home of how this is affecting everyday Vermonters.
Next slide, please. So this is what this is kind of I set the groundwork for what's called the Digital Equity Act. The definition of digital equity is here, and I talked about the numbers here. The $60 million for state planning grants we already received $518,000, our share of that for doing our digital equity plan. So we've received, they kind of gave us a cash advance of $5 million to be able to support the administration that we need in order to develop the 5-year plan of how we're going to build the infrastructure. And that $513,000 to support building the digital equity plan. We hired a digital equity officer, Brittany Watson, in order to lead the equity program. She comes from a long history of equity activism. Next slide, please. If you look at the core planning team, we have 60 members from across the state, including, for example, Catherine Delmo, the state librarian. Libraries are a critical part of this because if you look at Vermont, we actually have the highest number per capita of libraries in the country, and the library is your trusted resource. So we're going to use libraries heavily for how we, deliver service, deliver devices, deliver training and support, and we have Department of Corrections represented here. The community action groups are represented here. So we chose 16 members of the core team. It's an active team that meets every 2 weeks. And there's the list of covered populations that we're targeting. And here's our digital equity timeline. We're looking at approval of our board for the plan that's being developed now in February of 2024, and then we submit it to the NTIA. But you can see we onboarded the equity officer. We're in the process now of developing the plan. We give a month public comment period once the plan is developed, and then we submit. Key part of all this, and it's actually addressed, one of the requirements of the BEAD program is to have a workforce development plan. The good news is we started right away in 2021 working on workforce development and put together a team that includes key construction companies in the state to identify what we need. Because if you look at the two constraints to getting Vermonters connected is material shortages, and we addressed that. That was the easier of the two to address. You address material by you look at the lead times, and we bought materials ahead of time in order to have it on hand when we started construction. So we were not held up by materials. So far, we haven't been held up by workforce. However, when that $42.5 billion hits our economy, we will have workforce problems, right? Because the whole country, to give you an example, we tried to hire a fiber optic engineer last year. We couldn't hire one. Well, as I reached out to other state offices, nobody could hire fiber optic engineers. There's just this huge shortage of fiber optic engineers. The same thing's going to happen with fiber optic technicians when we get into construction. We know we need 200 more fiber optic technicians. We know we need tree trimmers, electrical line workers. So we put together a program, an apprenticeship program. And thanks to the legislature that gave the Department of Labor a $531,000 grant last year to help us with this workforce development plan. We actually took that grant over 2 months ago because the Department of Labor is having labor shortages. We reached out to the Community College of Vermont. They didn't have the staff to do it. So with the permission of our board, we took that grant over. And I'm proud to say we're starting the Train the Trainer program on November 7th. Our goal is to have 10 trainers signed up. We have 12. We're going to train trainers on November 7th. In December, we're going to start offering the apprenticeship program. We've worked with all the key construction companies are advising us on this. When somebody graduates the apprenticeship program, they go right into a paying job with the telecom companies. And our largest telecom company is been working closely with us. We also are working with the Communication Workers of America and the IBEW on this program. This is the first in the country that's rolling out this apprenticeship program. It was approved by the U.S. Department of Labor, who approves these apprenticeship programs, and again, we're taking the lead in the country. But I like to say, we're 30,000 people. We should be able to do these things right. And by the way, we're also now reached out and working closely with was it, the Vermont Workforce Woman? Yeah, what goes without doing. Because we do want to get more women into the trades. So this kind of, these are, it's all about Vermonters. We have a great infrastructure in place to make this happen. We have a tremendous engagement. I can't say enough good things about what's happening. And thanks to the foresight of the legislature first. When I go to the rest of the country, I say, this is a brilliant piece of legislation put together.
So I always marvel at how smart we are.
How smart?
How smart we are.
Well, I think everybody's smart. I didn't just say we get along and we're a small state.
Just a question, and I know you and I have spoken about this before, and that is we seem to be on track, probably better than almost any state in the nation, in getting fiber optic to the premise universally throughout the state. The concern that I think some of us have is that we will take fiber past people's front windows, and if they're not at the lowest level of income in the state, they're not going to be able to connect and pay for it on an ongoing basis. And I'm wondering how you've approached that.
Okay, I'm so glad you asked that question. That is such a thorny issue, and the way it's being set up right now, it's a flawed approach. So the problem, and I'll say that because what we're doing now is we're taking, if you look at the average cost per passing in Chittenden County, it's $1,500. If you look at the average cost per passing in the areas we're trying to serve, it's $10,000. So you've got a very expensive area to serve. We have to build sustainable business plans. So when you look at the business plans for serving these areas, in order to be sustainable, we have to get $100 per average paying customer. So if you try to build an affordability program, you're now going to have to raise the top end to fund the low end. Once you start getting over $100, your take rate, meaning the number of people that consume it, drops pretty dramatically. So this is a thorny issue. And I say it's unfair because think about it. You've got more than double the number of low-income people in these rural areas, and you're requiring low-income people to fund low-income people. It would be much better if we focus this as a statewide. We met a couple weeks ago, a number of us in this room met with Jessica, Chairperson Jessica Rosenwald of the FCC. She made the point that if we treated this nationwide, it would only be a 4% increase on people's phone bills, including cellular phones. But when we're trying to do it at a small area like we're doing, it puts this in a situation where you got low-income people trying to support low-income people and a much more significant impact to the bill in order to provide that affordability. That's a serious problem. We're trying to address it. I know, VCUDA's been looking at it on the CUDs, but you have to have a sustainable business plan. We can't put together a CUD or a telecom provider and then have them go out of business.
One thing to note is that when we did the business plans, approved the business plans and put out the grant funding, we were basing that on the idea that we were going to be getting $150 million from BEAD, not 229. It was also based on the idea that we would be able to do grant funding for about 60% of the funds. With the extra BEAD fundings, we're hopeful that we will be able to do more than that. There's the other side of the equation is there's been private builds. One of the other aspects that many people desired in Act 71 was that it was going to inspire competition. It was going to inspire the incumbents to start building. So it's reducing the number of addresses. So we are undertaking a revision of asking many of the CUDs to revise and update their business plan. And we're hoping that number comes down.
Well, you've got right now, you mentioned one CUD in southwestern Vermont that's finished. Has there been any experience shown from there what's happened to the ability to connect? Because I'm thinking, for example, the one that I know in the private sector that seems to have done that was the expansion of Franklin Telephone did. And one of the feedback that we got from them is they got fiber to the premises throughout their area of operations. And the notion of cost was that some people were going to take the faster speed and the more data piece at the higher monthly rate, but what they found was a substantially smaller portion than they anticipated did that, and that puts some cost pressures downward. So I'm wondering where we have one CUD that's complete now, are they experiencing anything similar to that, and how's that working out?
Well, the CUDs that are completed are, this is where Rob talked about us asking for revisions in the business plan. That the CUDs are experiencing higher take rates than they expected. So that's meaning more people are adopting. They were doing this with a plan of about half of people taking the internet. There are more people taking this. So that should improve the business plan. We have more grant funding. So that will drive that average revenue required per paying customer down. How far down, we don't know. But let me also add, there's another program called the Affordability Connect program, the ACP. It's a federal program that will provide the first $30 of a bill. So, if we can drive the top down and we get that $30 subsidy, then we can narrow that gap and make it more affordable. There's a problem with that program too. In case you noticed, we're having problems getting anything done at the congressional level nationally. That program will run out of money in April of 2024. And they're required, the ISPs, the ones that the providers are required to give a notice 3 months early ahead of time. So you can start to see the people that are on this program will get notices in January that they're going to lose this program. We think that's terrible. That, it's every state across the nation has said this is terrible, but we're not optimistic that's going to get renewed. And that's where maybe, we can look at something at a statewide level. If we talk about modifying the USF or things like that, there may be ways to address. But I worry that money goes away. Right now, 17% of the eligible Vermonters are taking part in that program. It's not a huge percentage. What we saw was a flattening of that. That curve was going up pretty good, and then it flattened as soon as people realized that money's going to go away. People kind of lost faith in the program, but that is how the federal government was addressing it.
One thing, just to respond to the Franklin telephone example, from what we're hearing from other CUDs, and as I heard last week from CD Fider, and Ellie may be able to talk, is that people are signing up for the more expensive plans than they expected with the higher speeds. I think that's one thing that has changed since during the pandemic, is realizing the need for that extra speed. There's also a marketing side and teaching people how to use it and cutting the cord side. That's an educational side that's important to make that work.
Yeah, I just want to remind us of the fact that while affordability is important and something we should always keep our eye on, it's also, in this context, in this time frame, a pretty brilliant lobbying ploy by the national telecommunications providers who are able to divert a lot of funding away from the build out of community broadband into the ACP and other things. When we think about rate regulation in the state of Vermont, we don't have that ability. And the only entities that we have any control over really are the CUDs, and we don't have complete control over the CUDs. They are getting funding. And so we really need to be making sure that we have context about this conversation in our heads.
Yeah, let me add to that too. Go back to the performance thing that I used Rob's example about the gallon of milk. There's definitely, we asked Chairperson Rosenworcel, can the states enact legislation to monitor performance? I come out of the electric industry. We were required monthly to report the percentage of outages, outage duration, and then lately we just implemented momentary average interruption frequency. I think it's MAFI. MAFI is really corresponds to latency in our telecom networks. So and I will tell you, I'm going to posit that telecom is even more important than electricity, and we should be mandating performance monitoring. And I've talked with June Turney from the PSD. She agrees 100%. She doesn't. The PSD doesn't have the authority right now to monitor performance, but you could pass state legislation to mandate that. And why I say telecom is more important than electricity is because the utilities are all highly dependent on telecom to restore power. So you lose, and, you know, I'll just brief story. I was sitting, you know, when Sandy was coming up the coast, we were on with the federal government and they said we were going to lose telecom. Be prepared to lose telecom. My whole staff, we'd all turned white because we said, you know, what are we going to do, right? You can't go back to the old ways. We went out and bought 3 satellite phones, but fortunately, you know, Vermont did lose fiber. We still had one good fiber, fortunately, and our IT person was watching the fiber in the river for the whole time to make sure we didn't lose it but I'm going to tell you, telecom is more important than electricity right now. Yet we don't regulate the performance.
Well, this goes back to the question we were talking about of the going away of the federal subsidy as early as April of next year. Is there anything that you'd recommend that we do legislatively as a just in case in order to assist in that situation? And if so, has any thought given as to what that might cost us to do?
No, I'm ahead of our board on this one, so you know, make sure this is, I'm giving you my candid opinions, but our board, we should be talking about this at our board. I think we are talking about it. Excuse me. We just haven't talked about this legislation, but we do have a committee focused on affordability who's doing that work. And that committee, I'm sitting on all these committees, has been talking about the need for that for some type of a funding source.
But it would be helpful to just have an understanding or projection at least as to how much it would cost to close that void in the event that we need to. If that is going to be something that's going to happen in April, the legislature is about to go home at that point, and then you have a long period of time in which nothing happens. So I wonder if there's anything that you and your committee could do to help us, or at least the committees of jurisdiction, stay on top of this issue in terms of what the projections are.
We'll have some more insight over the next few months of seeing how things go at the federal level.
Yeah, we should be ready by January.
Bipartisan support, but that doesn't necessarily mean much of anything right now.
Yeah, the affordability committee, this is why I say I'm getting a little ahead of the board, because the affordability subcommittee has identified this is, what I'm reporting to you is that's an issue. Our board has recognized that as an issue. We recognize that we may need legislation, but that's as far as we've gone. But the affordability committee continues to meet.
Any other questions, comments, concerns, points of interest?
One thing I do want to mention, this just goes to just how well we are working in conjunction with that public service department, is we challenged a lot of wireless addresses during the challenge process to the FCC. The department did the wireless drive test. As a result, the FCC is investigating wireless coverage and requiring speed tests from the providers in Wyndham County. So we're moving the needle in terms of federal advocacy and figuring out what reality really is. I'll leave it at that.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
Mike, have we heard anything from FX yet?
Nope, just that they were gonna try to join with the Zoom because they had not been doing well. And I did reiterate the agenda changes to them and have not heard back. I put a note on the door of room 10 directing people up here, so.
Thank you. Reps Billy?
Yes, I see that we are about to go to public comment, and before we do so, I see that we have on here the name of someone who has sexually harassed multiple people in this room, myself included, who has defamed and harassed a number of state employees from a number of departments that are here, and who has lost the ability really to weigh in because of his behavior. I know that you're aware of how distressed I am that this person has been invited once again, despite this ongoing harassment, to weigh in. And so, Mr. Chair, I am asking you to please keep a very short leash. And if there is behavior attacking individuals, sexually harassing anyone, I see he's already taking pictures. I hope that you will handle that appropriately. Thank you.
Understood. All right.
I consider those false allegations harassment, but I'll leave that at that. See that for what it's worth. I have not sexually harassed.
I will offer, I would take her statements as my feelings on that. So you have been warned. Behave.
I caution you about slandering people without any evidence. So.
Mr. Chair. I am happy to postpone Mr. Whitaker's testimony and allow him to weigh in on public comment after we can arrange for him, perhaps, to learn about, in fact, what sexual harassment constitutes. I think that we could probably provide that for him since he is very interested and willing to participate in the government process, which we certainly want. But there are multiple allegations of sexual harassment. So he doesn't seem to understand that. So hopefully we can just get to what's going on here.
Actually,
provide him some
no
help.
Allegations ever presented or filed or documented of sexual harassment by me. So I would respectfully ask the chair to.
There's something in writing that this team has seen that came from you. So I think we have things in writing.
A reference to
I'll put it this way. Do you want to discuss telecom and issues?
Yeah,
Or
I
do
just
you
don't,
want to-
I don't need to be slandered here either. So I will,
Floor is open.
there is no claims of sexual harassment at all.
That's inaccurate.
Okay, well, put your money where your mouth is. I will speak to some of the erroneous information you've heard today and clarify some things that folks that presented. I'll start with the FirstNet and the Public Safety Broadband Network Commission. That was created by executive order. It expired. It was recreated 4 years ago with no members ever appointed to it. It's called the Emergency Communications Advisory Council. So this is not something that can be done around. And the legislature in the appropriations bill last year created the Public Safety Communications Task Force. That task force supersedes the need to do drive tests again because they are hiring subject matter experts to do a statewide propagation study of both public safety radio and cellular. The department of Public Service and the Public Utility Commission do not have jurisdiction to regulate cell or broadband, but they do have jurisdiction to regulate facilities. Every time we site a tower, issue a tower permit, every time we issue VTrans permits to build fiber, we can put reliability standards on that infrastructure. We have opted not to do so thus far, but we need to do so because we will have ice storms and wind storms knocking down fiber, and that will take out cell towers, that will take out public safety radio, and we are not at all prepared for it. So emergency preparedness planning is disconnected from our broadband fiber initiatives. But you keep hearing the word accountability and transparency with regards to our broadband efforts. You need to examine what those terms mean. When you have all the business plans under proprietary cover, when you have the financial models under proprietary cover, when you don't know what the revenue share is between the operating entity, Waitsfield Champlain, or, whomever else, and the CUD, that's not transparency. These are, never before has there been municipal entities operating under this degree of secrecy. Now, related to the plans, we have a long, and it's not a dinosaur at all. We have a recently updated 10-year telecommunications planning statute. In fact, it was Senator Brock that sponsored or ushered those amendments into a bill just a year prior to the broadband board being created. Those planning requirements are current. They are specific. They are not met by the department by any stretch. And you can ask your lawyer to look through the statutory section by section, the contract with the vendor, section by section. Look at the plan, section by section. The plan comes nowhere close to meeting those requirements. And yet we paid $500,000 for the emergency broadband plan, another $250,000 for the 10-year telecom plan following close after. Now it jumped to $400,000 for the current project. I mean, we're dumping money on plans that are useless. They do not meet the goals of statute. They do not meet the letter of statute. And there is no conflict between what the broadband board is doing and the current statute. The statute says affordable. The 202C says competitive choice for consumers. It says open access for competitors. There's no exception to that. There's nothing in the broadband enabling legislation that says you're allowed to go build monopolies. I mean, that's a fallacy you're being fed here, that in effect we should ignore the statutory policies and goals of the state in favor of letting this initiative go haywire until it train wrecks. And it will train wreck. They will run out of money. They will have not served all the addresses. You keep hearing that we're going to serve every address with fiber, and yet the legislation and the funding specifically preclude serving the areas that are already served with cable, which are the most dense areas. So we're not building fiber other than where Consolidated did it across Brattleboro, Berry City, Montpelier, and some others. We're not building fiber to every address. We're building to every address that is unaffordable to the carriers. But this reassurance that Bennington County and Southern Vermont CUD is 99% served. I mean, yes, by the very same company that you've just complained about not being able to provide reliable quality of service or be responsive to outages. So we've actually granted or extended a monopoly to Consolidated across Bennington County using public money. They built the areas that were profitable to them, and the public built the areas that are not profitable to them. And then they, in effect, operate the whole thing on a monopoly basis. And if the deal falls apart, they rip their equipment out and go, and we're left with nothing but dark fiber on the poles. So you're not hearing the downside of this reckless. The enabling legislation for the broadband board, if you recall, Senator Brock, you facilitated an opportunity to have a statewide resilient engineered fiber design done and available funding to do it. The broadband board opted not to do it. The broadband board came in here and misrepresented that it would take 2 years to do. And that's why they didn't do it. They're still don't have a plan, and we don't have anything close to an engineered fiber plan using the most cost-effective infrastructure, which is Velco, Green Mountain Power, the co-ops. The pole-owning utilities are the most cost-effective and most resilient entities to own and maintain the fiber. They can have the trained people on staff in Vermont. We're going to have big storms come through, and all these folks that were brought in from Florida and Missouri and Texas to build fiber aren't going to be here to repair it. So we're going to have probably months-long outages with hundreds of fiber breaks, and we've made no provision for that. We have not built on the Velco infrastructure because Velco's on the broadband board. We've not built on the Green Mountain Power. Just one CUD, Central Vermont, is going to be spending $400,000 annually for pole attachment rental. Okay? That's where your affordability is going. That rental would be zero if the pole owning utilities had been building the fiber. So this
broadband board is way off the tracks, headed for a train wreck, a $500 million train wreck. And the cost of money, you've heard that they're based on intention to bond, junk bonds like EC Fiber did. And those bonds are going to be 16, 18%. That money is not going to be available. You've got a blatant conflict of interest embedded in your system right here with an oversight body that in effect is afraid to even propose an amendment to close the loophole where legislators were not allowed on the broadband board by the legislature, but it was an oversight, obviously, to not allow the CUDs to appoint a legislator. So to have a legislator on the committee of jurisdiction, meaning energy and environment, in effect suppressing oversight by that committee, and to be on this committee as well suppresses oversight. No one will dare ask the questions that need to be asked if the answers are obviously, oh, I know because I'm on the inside of the executive sessions, but I can't tell you, right? It totally defeats not only optics.
I hear your frustrations. Are there any other issues you'd like to address? We do have FX Flynn, who is also going to be testifying.
Yes. Like you heard from ADS, you heard from the state auditor's office on the independent expert reviews. Department of Public Safety some years back embarked on a $12 to $13 million program that at the time was called Lifeline, and they've now renamed it VCOM. No independent expert review was done. It was a sinkhole. Nobody's using that system because the portable radios don't have keypads on them, and it takes a keypad to activate. So here's an issue of oversight. Department of Public Safety is now embarking upon microwave upgrades because the 9 million Leahy earmark for the public safety regional dispatch is not allowed to be subgranted. So that's going to be basically invested in new microwave upgrades. That presumably will get an independent expert review. The energy plan versus the telecom plan, the specificity, the performance metrics, today's distributed generation and storage for the electric grid does not operate without broadband. The connectivity, the intelligence to actually manage that distributed generation and storage will not work when the broadband breaks. So if we're not building public safety grade broadband to support those utilities, which we're not, we're in effect not going to have the use of that intelligent microgrid capable electric to weather emergencies. And I remember Senator Bray, you were on finance at the time, Senator Bray put forth a proposition that we build utility grade broadband such that CUD could fail and there's not even a glitch before another entity can take over and keep that operating. That was ignored as well. So the Homeland Security Grant Program is another $6 or $8 million a year that comes into the state. Much of it for telecommunications and IT, but it's not even subject to the grant acceptance requirement by joint fiscal, which all other grants are. But because this has been a recurring grant, it does not currently go through joint fiscal. That should be remedied. So the Public Safety Communications Task Force is currently reviewing proposals for subject matter experts to design a statewide public safety grade resilient communications dispatch infrastructure. That'll include rethinking the number of dispatch centers where they are, the number of PSAPs where they are, the connectivity, where fiber is
exposed to risk of tree falls. It might be backed up with microwave. They're basically hiring, they'll probably spend $1 million or $2 million over the next few years designing a statewide infrastructure that is to the grade that we should be, these processes should be integrated, and they're not. In fact, it's clear from Hunter Thompson's testimony that he's not even aware of that if he's going to go out and start doing drive tests again. So,
Steve, I think we're running up against the clock here. So if there's any further comments or concerns, feel free to submit them if you'd like them submitted to the committee at large. Mike can post them to the website.
well, there is significantly more because you heard from a whole lot of folks. And I'll look for your invitation to come back.
Don't hold your breath. And with that, let's transition to FX. Thank you for your patience and your flexibility.
Hey, no worries. Thank you very much. So I guess I would like to begin by saying that today was, extremely interesting. This committee's got quite a set of responsibilities. And it's very interesting to hear the broad sweep of what's going on around IT around the state. I've lived in Vermont for 25 years, and until I retired about 3 years ago and started being chair of EC Fiber, which turned out not to be retirement, I was a dollar importer who made his living doing IT consulting for big companies around the country. And, I certainly have been involved with, big projects and seen, how difficult they are to pull off, especially when you've got a mix of staff and different consulting firms to go, and technology is moving quickly on you. So I give a lot of credit to what Vermont is accomplishing. EC Fiber today has some really good news to share. We've gotten through a process with Standard & Poor's to get a rating for our bonds. And the final step is underway. And we're hoping that sometime in the next week or two, there'll be an announcement that they have rated our new offering for $7.5 million. That'll be going out in November. This will be the first time they have ever rated a municipal revenue bond issued by a government that wasn't backing it with some form of taxing power. This is a really important aspect to what has been created here in Vermont with the CUDs, and with what really was a grassroots effort in these towns 15 years ago to create a solution to market failure. We had to say, how can we use instrumentalities of government to put in place a business that is critical yet lacking? A new analogy that I've enjoyed using to some effect this summer is to say, here's a thought experiment for you. What if every gas station in Chelsea and Tunbridge and Stratford and Vershire and Thetford went out of business, so there were no gas stations? Would anybody blink if the town said, okay, we're going to get together and we'll set up a little business to operate a couple of gas stations? No. That's effectively what we've done. we are operating a business that goes by the trade name of EC Fiber, owned by the East Central Vermont Telecommunications District. And it's a very different cat. There really isn't anything like it out there in the world, in the United States anyway, because most governments that have enterprises have taxing power to protect that enterprise. And most, or failing that, they're operating regulated businesses which are guaranteed to make a profit, basically, just like the electric utilities. So, and in turn, because of that regulation, are required to do different things. So the CUDs are a very different model. And the other thing is that, the CUDs were, Vermont created the CUDs really as a favor to the 23 towns that had organized and stood up this business, which has been serving customers since a few days before Irene hit in 2011. And, we basically, pulled this up out of the ground, on our own, no grants, basically. The Orange County Fiber Connector helped to tie together a bunch of disparate places that we had locally raised money to serve. That was helpful. That was probably worth $1 million to us. But right now, we're sitting on $64 million in debt, and we've built 1,800 miles of network. We've got 8,000 customers. All of our original 23 towns are being served, and we're well along on building 3 of the 8 new towns that we admitted in 2020. I'm concerned that we're not going to see any of the BEAD money. Why? Because we're going to basically be done with everything except Windsor, which already has service from Comcast. But the mission of our district has, from the day one, has been to provide our services to every home and business in our member towns. And Windsor is our member town. We will build Windsor, regardless of the fact that it's already got Comcast. And, our whole business model and everything is built around that. But I have to say that in 2020, when I was encouraging our board to go ahead and admit these new towns, I was saying out loud that the federal government was going to be putting a lot of money into this. And I expected that by and large, those grants would wind up, paying for the lion's share of that. And that's now turning out not to be true. It's only going to be, it's going to be probably 40% of what it's going to cost us to build the 8 new towns. And we'll have to borrow the rest, or we'll have to use surplus. So, that's one of the things that I'm grappling with. I'm trying to figure out a way forward, around that. So basically that's our story. We're banging away. We're going to be done with the unserved towns up to our north next year, and we're going to be sitting on about $71 million of bonds that we're going to have to pay off between now and 2050 or so. The fact that we're going to get a bond rating may mean that we can refinance some of the earlier bonds at a lower rate at some point in the future. But we are going to have to hit that $100 a month ARPU, which we do with a base rate of $72 a month another 25 if you want phone service, which about half of our customers take. So 72 plus 97, gets you part of the way. We're also going to be introducing multi-gigabit service in the White River Junction, Wilder, Quechee parts of Hartford, because we just, and then eventually in Fairleigh, West Fairleigh, and Bradford, because as we build our new switches, we're building them to be 10 gigabit switches instead of 1 gigabit. We're going to have to come up with a couple $1 million to upgrade all of our other hubs, because we'd like to be able to provide that to everyone. We'd like to go back and redo some of our original build. We've got about 700 addresses that are counted by the state as being served, but in actuality, we can only, if I guess 350 customers took them in those areas, or 450 took them, we'd be out of capacity. So we've got some remedial work we want to go back and do. Yeah. So I don't know, when I see like Southern Vermont CUD being credited as being done, when I hear them saying that they were the first gigabit community, kind of, gives me pause, I have to say. Okay, the other topic I wanted to say is that I've become aware over the course of the last year or so that a lot of people are really worried about repeating the errors that were made around the infrastructure money in 2009, when we poured a lot of that into putting up the LTE towers for fixed wireless access, FWA, hotspots in effect. And that didn't work. But, everybody thought that technology would work. Nobody really understood that when the trees leafed out, people's service would plummet. It wasn't venality, it wasn't evil, it wasn't bad actors that caused that to fail. It was the fact that the technology was relatively new, and that the initial results were very positive out there in the rest of the world, and nobody really realized just what a tough nut to crack Vermont is when you're talking about wireless. So I think we should get over that, and I think we should stop harping on that as having been a big mistake and a failure, because it wasn't a governance mistake. It wasn't a business failure. It was a technological failure. Okay. I just heard some comments about the electric utilities being the right place to go for all this work. I'm sorry, but the deeper I get into this and the more time I've spent on this over the last several years, the more it's become apparent to me that we've always had serious labor issues in utility construction in Vermont. It was something that EC Fiber was battling its entire history. It's why EC Fiber came to the legislature in 2019, begging for relief from having to wait from the pole owning entities to do work so that we could get our fiber on the poles. And that really was when the legislature woke up to the fact that EC Fiber had actually succeeded, and why the legislature decided to start trying to figure out some way of putting money into CUDs. The truth of the matter is that, the utilities in the state of Vermont are stressed. The telecom companies in Vermont are stressed. It is a difficult economy, and it is a difficult set of factors work with. And I do think that the division of labor that we have right now, is pretty appropriate. I don't think that all the munis inside Vespa, could in any way, shape, or form take on the responsibility for fiber. There are very few of them, and they're even talking about, moving to smart grid technology. EC fiber, CV fiber, and NEK broadband. We spent almost a year and a half in conversations with WEC about how we could help them build a smart grid and also lower our cost of building out. And these were conversations that started before ARPA and before the creation of the VCBB. And it just turned out to be, too complicated, number one. And number two, the arrival of the ARPA money and the promise of the BEAD money created much clearer, faster alternative paths. So those are a few of my comments and reflections on today and on where we're at. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Do we have any questions for FX? Senator.
It's one question. I don't know if you were here for the part of the presentation, FX, but one of the things we talked about was affordability and whether or not those people, not just at the lower end who are getting the $30 a month subsidy, but people who are slightly above that, are they able to afford to be able to connect, or do you have fiber passing by some houses that people, again, still because of closing that cost gap, aren't connecting?
It's a really complicated question, Senator. I have a guy that I, have been friends with for a long time who I know, struggles financially, and he's got a landline and he's got his internet service, and he has access to EC fiber. And, you add up what he's paying now, and it's, I don't know, like $120 a month or something like that. And I'm like, well, if you switch to EC fiber, $72 and $25, that's $97. You'd save some money that way, but you could actually dispense with the phone entirely, because with your EC fiber in the house, you've got the same speed in both directions. And so on your cell phone, you just turn on use Wi-Fi calling. And then it doesn't matter that you don't have a cell signal in your house, because your house internet connection on the Wi-Fi in your house will put your phone call on the internet, and it'll be connected that way. And, to me, it's like a no-brainer, but that wasn't like, oh, great idea. He was like, oh, I really have to think about that. And, there are other people who are in situations where they don't really need, or they don't perceive that they need to use the internet that much. So they're using it on their cell phone. And so they are looking for the least expensive cell phone service they can get that has data, and it winds up turning out to be some prepaid plan that taps out after a certain amount of data has been used. And it's extremely cost inefficient, and they would be much better off if they just paid that money on a monthly basis and had like a 2-year plan with a cell company. But they don't want to have a monthly commitment, right? They're really watching every penny. So the complexity of designing an affordability solution for each individual who has an affordability challenge is immense.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Is there anything else you'd like to leave us with, FX?
No, except that I'm happy to provide, any information or assistance that any of you might need. I'll leave it at that.
Perfect. Thank you. And thank you again for your flexibility. With that committee, I'd like to take the last few minutes to try to do a brief committee discussion and scheduling for the next meetings. In looking at the polls, it looks like the best options are going to be November 7th and December 5th. November 7th appears to have the most availability from 9 to 3, similar to today. And then the 5th appears to have the most availability from 1 o'clock on.
That is a Sunday, isn't it?
December 5th?
December, I'm sorry. So it's
November
the 7th.
7th and December 5th. Are there any objections in the committee to setting the next meetings for those?
How late do we run if we start at, say, 1 o'clock? I'm not familiar with
What's folks' availability for afternoons, evenings? I don't want to run into the evening, but
I think it's just staffing, really. Staff, probably like 4. 4:35, I don't know,
Okay.
depending on Mike. Really.
when Mike gets back, we can ask, let's tentatively plan for 1 to 4 for the 5th. And then 9 to 3 for the 7th, November 7th.
Thank you.
7th, 9 to 3. And December the 5th,
1 to 4.
1 to 4. Works for me.
Okay. My intention is to have a couple more conversations with Lisa and ADS to do a deeper dive into the reports and programs that we're supposed to be reviewing. I did talk briefly with Lisa. She said that she, for the January 1st or July 1st of this year, when things are progressing apace, and she should be able to report, hopefully, her recommendations at that point. Questions, comments? Yes.
Just a suggestion. I would be interested in hearing a little bit about each one of those projects that are listed as part of that.
Well, let me ask for the committee. Would it be better to have a report from Lisa on all of these things and then from ADS, or pick a project, hear from Lisa, then hear from ADS, hear from Lisa, hear from ADS?
Other folks are thinking, and not all projects are equal, but some of them are bigger projects. Like the UI project, I would really like us to hear.
Yeah, that's an important project.
Yeah.
And the question is, do we hear solely from the project, or do we also invite in, at least to be able to answer questions, representatives from the agency for whom the item is being developed?
That works. All right. We don't need to vote to adjourn the committee.
Is 4 okay? Check.
Oh, Mike, is 1 to 4 on December 5th okay?
For the next meeting or
For the 3rd. We're looking at November 7th from 9 to 3 and December 5th from 1 to 4.
November 7th is a very busy day in the buildings for other things too. It's not, you can't do it, just giving you the heads up that there's
Okay.
other things going on.
And for staffing is ending at 4 okay for you?
That's fine.
Okay.
At that day, November 7th, I'll have to have somebody else covered, but it'll be, I'll have the new supervisor of community services cover this.
All
It'll
right,
be a great first time.
perfect. Then with that,
Easier committee.
There are-